How much do you need to be financially independent? Now, if you've been saving for any amount of time, you've probably set goals for yourself. And as you've done that, you've had to think about what it is you're saving for. And as you think about what you're saving for, it's only natural to think about how much do I really need to meet those goals? Now, the amount of money you need to actually become financially independent is what we often refer to as your number. And this is the point in life where you kind of go from being someone who works because they have to someone who either works because they want to, or maybe you don't work at all because you don't need to anymore. Now, everyone is different, but today we're going to talk about how you can calculate your number yourself, and we're going to talk about how your spending has a huge impact on that. All right, first let's kind of talk about spending. There's an important principle you need to understand in financial planning, and that's that the amount you need in order to be financially independent is dependent on your spending, not on your income. So many times I see people put these in the wrong order, that somehow income determines how much you need to save. Well, that's not going to matter when you retire. That's not going to matter when you leave the workforce. What's going to matter is how much you're consuming, how fast you're eating into that nest egg, if you will. So it's important to understand that spending determines your need, not your income. For example, let's suppose you have two guys who are approaching retirement. One's named Jimmy, one's named John. Now, Jimmy's got $2 million for his net worth. John's only got $900,000. Now, based on that information alone, you might think Jimmy's in a better spot financially than John. And you could be right, but you don't really know unless you understand the obligations they have for that money. In other words, you don't know how much they're going to spend. So what if I told you Jimmy spent $400,000 a year, while John only spent $75,000 a year? This would mean that John has 12 times his annual expenses saved, while Jimmy only has 5. Now, Jimmy probably has a lot more flexibility given that he has a $2 million net worth. But if he doesn't get his spending under control, his nest egg may not last very long. And that brings us to our first important question when you're trying to understand what your number is. How much will you spend? We already hit on this a little bit, but there's no way you can know how much you need if you don't know how much you spend. If you leave this video with nothing else in mind, remember that. You have to know how much you spend. There's a couple ways you can do this. First is the B word, B-U-D-G-E-T, budget. Not a lot of people love that word. Not a lot of people love doing budgets. I understand, but you need to know what your spending is in order to understand how much you got to save. So budgeting is one way to identify that. We'll put a link below to a post we did on budgeting. It's actually the first or starting point on the Next Dollar Roadmap on our website. We'll put that in the description below. Another method you could use is just to take and print out or go to a website and pull up your bank statements for the last several months or even a whole year, or your credit card statements, whatever you're using to spend regularly, and just have a record of that. That way you can get an idea of monthly, quarterly, whatever you're spending, and you'll have a picture at least of what you're spending. After you've done that, you want to remove any expenses that you don't expect to have when you become financially independent. An example would be a house. A lot of people want to pay off their mortgage before they quit working or retire. That's a good idea to do. Another thing might be if you have kids, they're going to leave the house. Some of the expenses associated with them, like for school or just generally taking care of them, those will go away. So those are the sorts of things you want to eliminate because they're not going to impact things in the future. Finally, you want to take that number, whatever it is you figured out, quarterly, monthly, whatever, and convert it to an annual amount. And the reason you do that is because there's so many other amounts and rates and things that we track annually. It's just going to make it a lot easier to compare, to evaluate where you stand in terms of your expenses and your actual need. If you think about things like annual rates of return, if you think of things like income that's received annually, taxes that are done annually, it just makes the whole process a lot easier. So we take our friend John from earlier. His need is $6,250 a month. You multiply that by 12 and you get the $75,000 annual expense that he's experiencing. Hey, if you haven't already, please click like and subscribe below. That helps us to grow the channel and teach other people about finance. All right, question number 2 is what income will you have? Now, you may receive income when you're financially independent or retired that you're not getting now. The first and most common and popular type is Social Security. That could be any amount given how much you paid over time. If you want to know how much your Social Security payment will be, you need to go to ssa.gov. You can basically establish an account. They already have all your information. They'll have records of how much you put into Social Security. They'll know if you retire at given ages, they can kind of give you an idea of what your monthly income will be from Social Security. It's a really easy way to kind of give a forecast and give you a picture of what that's going to look like. Another common source of income in retirement or financial independence are pensions. Only about 15% of workers in the United States are still covered under traditional defined benefit plan. But if you're one of those, be sure to account for that as you calculate your income. Other sources of income might include rental properties, dividends, interest from stocks, bonds, things like that. Be sure to account for all that as you do your income calculation. All right, now that you've got that income number in mind, you want to convert it to an annual number as well. All right, so going back to our pal John, he's going to start receiving Social Security at age 62. He's going to get $3,000 a month. That means $36,000 a year of income will be coming to John from Social Security. If you take that from the $75,000 of his annual expenses, that means he has a gap of $39,000 he needs to cover from other sources. All right, now that we have an annual number, we know what our need is, we got to figure out a way to take that amount and calculate a lump sum that will provide that annually. Now there's a common tool called the 4% rule. 4% rule was a product of something called the Trinity study. It was done by a group of professors at Trinity University in Texas. And these professors ran a battery of tests to determine what a safe withdrawal rate would be for a given set of portfolio investments. All right, to summarize the outcome of the study, they determined that a 4% withdrawal rate would give you a very high likelihood of success for a 30-year retirement window. In other words, what that means is if you only withdrew about 4% of the portfolio's value in the first year and increase that with the consumer price index for inflation every year after that, odds are it was going to last you at least 30 years. In really simplified terms, it means 4% is a safe withdrawal rate, and if you do that, you probably won't ever run out of money. Now, we'll talk more about the merits of the 4% rule in just a minute, but it's a great rule of thumb. It gives an opportunity for an easy calculation to kind of understand where you stand financially. Now, just using the math, what you'd want to do is take the amount of annual need, so if we go back to John, it's $39,000, and you divide it by 4%. And that would give you $975,000. But dividing by a percent like 4% is a little challenging. So those of you who are astute at math, you know that 4% is also equal to 1/25. So if we multiply 25 times that annual need of $39,000, we get the same number, $975,000. That's the amount John needs to have in a lump sum in order to be financially independent. Because if he spends 4% of that every year, it will provide the $39,000 that he needs to cover the gap between Social Security and his actual annual expenses. So good news for John. He only needs $75,000 to meet his number. You can use the same method to calculate your own financial need as well. All right, a few caveats. First, some would consider 4% a really aggressive withdrawal rate, especially if you retire or leave the workforce before you're 60. Others would argue the exact opposite. I've heard it said that 4% is highly conservative, and some people I've read have even pushed for 7-8%. Now, these aren't just kooks on the internet. These are people who have well-established blogs, who've written books. So there's a lot of variety of opinions, which is why I just stuck to 4%. Now, personally, I like to err on the side of being conservative. For 50s, I'd probably use 3% withdrawal rate. 40s, probably 2.5%, 3%, somewhere in there. And the reason is you would rather have too much in retirement than not enough. Because once you leave the workforce, going back is really tough. Another caveat, this was a really simplified example. Jimmy and John had very basic numbers, very simple incomes. In reality, your life's not going to look like that. So your income's going to climb through the rest of your career, especially in your 40s and 50s when you're kind of peaking out. And then when you do declare financial independence or leave the workforce, unless you do it after age 62, you won't have Social Security up to that point. So let's say you leave the workforce at 55, you'll have 7 years where there is no income from Social Security. And then on top of that, maybe you have a pension, or maybe there's other income that you'll receive. There's an endless number of possibilities here. So we ran through a real high-level scenario. This 4% rule is great if you're far from retirement and you're just looking for a target to aim at. It's great for that. But if you're approaching the runway and you're about to land the plane and enter retirement, it may be worthwhile to reach out to a financial professional like a financial planner, where they can run some really, detailed scenarios. They can do Monte Carlo analysis. They can tell you based on your income what you actually need. And these are guys that do this all the time. I've heard it said that financial planners do retirements every day. You only get to do it once, so why not pay a pro? And in my opinion, whatever they charge, which is probably pretty expensive, they're not cheap, but it'll probably pay for itself with effective tax planning and just helping you avoid a lot of things you don't want to run into as you enter retirement. Finally, none of this is advice. This is all just kind of to help you learn, give you sort of an idea of where you're headed. None of this in this video is meant to convey personal financial advice. You should always seek professional help. Unless, of course, you're just looking for a rough idea of where you're headed financially. All right, I hope you found this helpful. The more clarity you have around your target, the more likely you are to hit it. Like I mentioned before, we have a written version of this post on our website. We'll put a link for it down below in the description. If you would, please click the like and subscribe buttons. Check us out on our social channels here below. As always, we're so thankful for your interest in what we're doing. We wish you the very best on your own financial journey. God bless. Take care.